Week 5, final look. Greg Ehrenberg joined by Geoff Ulrich once again. Show sponsored by Yahoo. So, Geoff, we've got some pretty interesting options this week at the quarterback position. A massive chalk play, Dak Prescott, projected for nearly 20% ownership. I think this is the most ownership we've seen on a quarterback all year. This is a little weird for me going up against the Giants because in a weird way, I almost think this is a weaker spot going up against the Giants than it's been in other weeks we've seen, just because we've seen Prescott have to throw the ball 50 times, and that shouldn't be the case this week. I mean, I think he's a good play. I think he might be going a little over-owned, though. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it feels like a spot where everyone has bought into the Cowboys. Like, we've seen it 3 times in a row now. So everyone's just like, this is happening. Every week, the Cowboys are throwing the ball 50 times, and we're getting 35-plus points from Dak Prescott. Time to get on the train. Like, I'm not going to miss another week. So it does feel like that, right? And look, I thought last week would be the week going up against like a rush first team in the Browns. Maybe the Dallas rush defense just slowed that game down a bit because they're really not that bad a unit. I know they were terrible last week, but I thought that would be the spot. I think Cleveland, though, proved to be a little bit more of a proficient team than I think people realize. I think that a lot of what happened last week was due to how good Cleveland is. I know Cleveland got blown out week 1, but I think that is actually a pretty good team with some really good running backs. And then you look at Seattle. I'm 100% on board with what you said, man. Like, I'm not trusting the Giants to get in a shootout here. I'm not trusting it. I think it's an insane thing that people are just, obviously, the pace that the Dallas Cowboys are playing at and just how many points they're allowing. But to trust that the Giants are going to somehow keep this just like a fast-paced game where they're going to force Dak Prescott into throwing the ball all the time and not allow them to grind a little clock, which they're going to want to do after that. I mean, you heard Mike McCarthy. So I think it's crazy. I think there's other really good spots, too, that are going to get lower ownership. And, if Dak does it again, he does it again. But at these prices or at these ownership levels, yeah, it definitely warrants a fade because we just generally don't see quarterbacks get up to those kind of projections.
Yeah, I mean, I still think he's viable. I'm not going to have zero exposure to him. I'm going to make game stacks there. I actually might have more exposure to Daniel Jones this week than I do to Dak Prescott, just because I think it's more likely that we see the Cowboys get off to a big lead and the Giants just have to throw the ball a lot to get back in. I mean, Daniel Jones at 5,400. We haven't seen him from him so far this year, but I mean, we saw a lot of fantasy upside from him last year. I always think he kind of gets a little bit of a pass because he's had one ridiculously good game in his career. It happens to be the first game he started. So I think a lot of people just hold on to like, hey, look, Daniel Jones is a really good prospect because he had that one really good game. It hasn't really panned out since then, but at 5,400, I think that he's a pretty good GPP target. Do you have any interest in Giant stacks going up against the Cowboys?
I mean, I do. And look, I don't want to talk down this game too much. I know I did off the start, but obviously the Cowboys receivers are still really good. And one of them or two of them could even be viable plays. It's just when you get to the ownership levels that they're at, and then you look at the other options, right? So that's kind of what I'm getting at. I agree. I think if I'm going to attack this game, it's probably going to be on the other side. But I mean, admittedly, I mean, I've been burned by the Giants once already this year. I don't really feel like going back to it again. So, you have some of their plays getting chalky as well. Like Slayton and Daniel Jones stacks are going to be popular. It's a weird spot. I think with how cheap the Giants are, you have to take a look at them. And I think from that perspective, like, fitting in a Daniel Jones stack with like one of the Cowboys receivers is a lot easier to do. It allows you to go to other games as well. So, Daniel Jones still has that a little bit of rushing upside too. I just feel like as the public just doesn't quite understand how bad the Giants have been this year because everybody else in the NFC East is terrible. So it's like they're just kind of, oh yeah, well, they're just as bad as everyone. They're not as bad as everyone else. They're the worst. Like they can't do anything. I mean, it's been an absolute disaster. So really does scare me a little bit. I'm not going to be eating a ton of chalk in this game, as you can probably guess, but I can't sit here and say that it's not tempting to play like a $10,000, total like Jones Slayton stack because it's really tempting. It's still a bad Dallas secondary, and trusting the Dallas defense to get anything done is a tough pill to swallow too. So I do like Slayton in this matchup. I could see Slayton going for a big game. Maybe just playing him on an island by himself might even be a good play. rather than just stacking this whole game, which I think has a little bit bigger bust potential than people are giving it credit for. So.
And as bad as the Giants are, a win today and they move right into a tie for first place in the NFC East because nobody in that division ever wins games. One other situation here that I think is really interesting, when Bill O'Brien got fired earlier in the week, my first thought was, hey, finally, a little bump for this Texans offense. Bill O'Brien no longer calling plays. Maybe they could finally get something going. They can't get worse. It can only be a positive for them. Maybe it ends up being a neutral. But with that said, Deshaun Watson is picking up a decent amount of ownership this week. He was pretty popular last week. I thought people were going to be off him, except apparently that's not the case since he's coming in as the second highest owned quarterback behind Dak Prescott. How do you feel about Watson this week? And do you think the firing of Bill O'Brien will help the offense at all?
Yeah. This almost feels like a trap. Like we're just, buying into this. Oh, it's going to be so different now. But realistically, what has changed? I mean, obviously they still have like limited receivers. It just hasn't worked. Deshaun Watson, quite frankly, hasn't looked good. Like he has looked like he is missing DeAndre Hopkins. I was one of those people who said I didn't really think it was going to be that big a deal for Dak Prescott. It's been a big deal so far. So it feels a little trappy from that perspective. And now the ownership is up there. Like people are kind of saying, well, obviously it's Deshaun Watson. He's got a ton of rushing upside and, he's under 7K. Now he's trending towards being like the second highest owned quarterback. So it's a little worrisome for sure. I still kind of like the spot a little bit better. Jacksonville as a defense has been like, they're just not tackling. They're just not doing anything. They're being banged up. So this could easily be one of those spots where just from start to finish, Houston comes out and just, lays the wood to them. And it's like, every drive they're going down, they're getting in scoring position. It really does feel like that game. And if you look at the matchups and stuff like that, David Johnson should get going here as well. So I know this is turning out to be a little bit more chalky than people thought, but I still really like the upside for this stack. You just wonder can Jacksonville keep this close? That's what I'm a little bit worried about. Does this just turn into, they get up 21 and then you just don't quite get enough to get there? I think that's the worry I have with the Deshaun Watson stack. And maybe why like paying down for, like a Bridgewater or Matt Ryan might be better because I feel like the game situation there is way more conducive to we're going to see them throwing back and forth all game because the defenses there just aren't any good. So
you mentioned paying down for quarterbacks there, Bridgewater, Ryan. I agree with you. I think both of them are fine options, a little bit less ownership than Dak Prescott and Deshaun Watson. I mean, once we get past Watson and Prescott, the ownership's pretty flat. Everybody's, 10% or lower, which is kind of what we see. There's always a lot of quarterbacks that are in that, 5 to 10% owned range. Is there anybody who's really low owned at the position that stands out to you this week?
There's really not a ton that I want to take a shot with. I mean, there's always going to be players out there, obviously, that have upside. I mean, Kyler Murray coming in at under 5% is probably the most interesting, right? We talk about, the Texans coming in against like a beat up Jags defense. I mean, why can't Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins just go absolutely ham and throw like 6 touchdowns here against just a completely listless Jets offense? I mean, it doesn't sound sexy because the Jets aren't going to have the firepower to come back, but we see this play out a lot of times. I mean, teams just come in and dominate, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, Kyler Murray's got 4 first half touchdowns. Like, why didn't I play him? It was such an obvious spot. So he's under 5, he's projecting for well under 5% owned. That is definitely the guy that sticks out to me the most. You do have a low owned Lamar Jackson again. I'm a little bit worried there because everyone there seems to be questionable. So I think if I was going to choose between the two, I'd probably go to Kyler and that Arizona stack. I think they're due for a big bounce back after kind of getting their offense, especially got a little bit embarrassed last week. So,
yeah, I'm with you. I love Kyler Murray this week. I mean, if you remember from last week, I was really high on Lamar Jackson, and even though the ownership is once again really low, and it's a favorable spot for him against the Bengals, like you, I worry about that injury. Even though it seems like there's no real risk of him missing the game, he was sick or something during the week. Then he had a knee injury. He didn't really start practicing until Friday. So you look at the matchup against the Bengals, one that I think the Ravens should win fairly comfortably. I just don't know what the need is to, in the fourth, even maybe in the third quarter, to have Lamar Jackson run the ball as much as he usually does. I think that this could maybe be a Mark Ingram game where they just run him a lot and try to, keep Lamar Jackson healthy. So I'm not really on Jackson this week. I totally agree with you on Kyler Murray, though. He was probably the highest owned quarterback for the first 2 weeks of the season. Then he has one bad game, and all of a sudden everybody's like, well, can't roster Kyler Murray anymore. He's no good now, which it's just an oversight to me because there aren't many quarterbacks that are higher upside than Kyler Murray. The Cardinals are going to throw the ball a ton. He's going to rush a lot. We've seen him score a few touchdowns on the ground this year. I love Kyler Murray. I think if you're taking a shot at a lower-owned quarterback to pivot off everybody, it's got to be Kyler Murray at 7,200. It is a little expensive, but nobody on the field is on him, and that's kind of how I felt about Lamar Jackson. That worked out for me last week. Any other quarterbacks you want to touch on before we move on?
Not really. I mean, again, it kind of feels like it is a little bit condensed week where I think a lot of eyes are just going to like 2 or 3 games. And I think rightfully so. Like, I mean, I'm usually someone who likes to try and bring out other games and potential, but I don't really see a lot of spots where I'm just like super pumped to get on a quarterback wide receiver stack. You could try the Kyle Allen thing. I mean, he's going to check down a lot with his tight ends. That could work out, but I mean, that is, I'm just not sure if you're going to get enough from him. I know he's going to be a great value, but like on this week, we don't have a ton of like a 10-game Christian McCaffrey to pay up for. I just don't think you need to do that. So Kyler Murray definitely sticks out as like the lone guy for me. Maybe Derek Carr and just playing the fast pace of the KC on the other side, but I don't really like that as much. So it's really kind of Kyler or bust alone. Oh, actually, I'll give a little shout out to Ben Roethlisberger, actually.
Okay.
Philly is not a great defense. Like we've seen what they do against the tight end, which isn't much. Pittsburgh coming off a bye, I could see that being a similar type of scenario where the Pittsburgh Steelers offense just flows from start to finish. A couple of their wide receivers, maybe Juju gets going in the slot. We've seen Pittsburgh do this before, especially at home. Just come and slaughter teams, when they're coming off and a weaker pass defense. So I actually kind of like the upside there for a Pittsburgh stack. Again, it's not really something I'm going out of my way to do, or I would go out of my way to do, but I think it's viable that Ben throws like 4 or 5 touchdowns this week, coming off a bye, essentially bye. So especially at like 1%, under 1% owned, I think that's worth a look if you're doing like a ton of GPP lineups.
Yeah, one note on Kyle Allen before we go on. I mean, 4,100 for a quarterback is pretty tough to totally ignore. The one thing, though, is, I mean, Dwayne Haskins did absolutely nothing, and I don't think Kyle Allen's a massive upgrade over him. The Washington football team almost slipped up there, caught myself, got the right name out. So with Washington, there's just the offense is terrible. There's no weapons, and it's a tough matchup against the Rams defense. So it's just tough for me to envision a big upside game from Kyle Allen. If you want to throw him into cash just to save some money, I think that makes sense because per dollar, I still think he's a good option. I just don't really see him having enough upside to win a GPP. The other thing, as you mentioned, it's not like there's some other guy we're paying up for. There's no Christian McCaffrey this week. We don't have Kamara on the slate at 9,000 or something like that to pay up for. So I think given the context of the slate, Kyle Allen doesn't make all that much sense.
I mean, and we know who he is, right? Like he's not a super proficient downfield passer. Like if he's gonna get like multiple touchdowns in this game, it's probably gonna be to like Logan Thomas or something. So I think just playing like one of the cheap guys like that or JD McKissick or something is probably a better option. I just don't think you need to go there. So.
All right. Today's show is sponsored by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, the most trusted name in fantasy sports. Yahoo DFS now includes CSV upload and CSV edit features for those looking to play multiple lineups. Make better choices. Choose Yahoo Daily Fantasy. So moving on to the running backs now. I think one guy here that we obviously really need, well, there's a bunch of guys we really need to talk about, but Ezekiel Elliott in particular, I know that he's going to be really chalky this week. However, if I'm playing one chalk guy from the Cowboys and I can only pick one of them, to me, it's Ezekiel Elliott. I prefer him to the wide receivers. I prefer him to Dak Prescott. I just think this matchup against the Giants, the Cowboys should be able to get out ahead. And the other thing, too, is with everybody rostering all these Elliott, Prescott, Cooper combinations, it's just so hard to envision all of them going off at the same time. We saw this a few weeks ago with it was Kyler Murray, Kenyon Drake, and DeAndre Hopkins. All 3 of them had a ton of ownership. And it just didn't really make a lot of sense because there was no situation where all 3 of them were going to go off. I kind of feel the same way about this game. And to me, I think Ezekiel Elliott has the best game script going up against the Giants. Are you scared of the ownership on him at all?
I'm definitely less scared about the ownership on Zeke. I'm actually not really that scared of it at all. I think we've seen Zeke Elliott get involved in every type of situation too, like almost be a better play when the Cowboys are behind because they just dump off so much and they get in against these prevent defenses. So no, I'm with you, man. Like I don't mind paying up for Zeke at all in the spot. I think that one thing that and this might actually keep his ownership down a little bit, like the Giants' rush defense has been pretty good so far. And I think people will look at that and be like, wow, this is, and they have actually looked pretty good against guarding against the run, which is weird, but I'm not necessarily sold this is like a rush defense you need to avoid either, right? So I think a lot of what they've done against opposing running backs, maybe just circumstance and maybe just how they played. So just how the games have gone and how they've thrown out their defenses. I don't necessarily think that this is going to be a spot where they're just going to completely shut down Ezekiel Elliott on the road. So I agree. I think Dallas does slow this game down a little bit. And I love what you said about just, all these combinations, they just can't go off there. They just can't keep continuing to go off. And when you think about it like that, well, you still want to get a piece of this game. Who's the most likely guy to do it on his own, like on an island? It's Zeke for sure, because there's so many scenarios where Zeke can pay off for you. It doesn't even necessarily have to be, Dallas just gets out in front and he runs. It could be a little bit of passing involved. Even in a close game, he could pay off. So I'm fine. Like, he's not projecting to be the top owned. I mean, again, we have Dak as clearly the top owned QB. Zeke is somewhere in there in the top 5, but he's not clearly the most chalky or anything like that. So I like it. I'd like paying up for him. I think on this slate too, you have to think like, again, we don't have a ton of people to pay up for, and not everyone's paying up for him. So I think it just makes it an even better spot.
So I know last week and going back, you've not been a big Mike Davis guy this week. I mean, this year. But looking at the ownership this week, I mean, he's projecting to be the highest owned player on the entire slate. He's kind of playing the pseudo Christian McCaffrey role. He's super involved in the passing game. Teddy Bridgewater seems to check down to him a million times per game. And now going up against the Atlanta Falcons, a team that has historically given up a ton of receptions to running backs. Are you finally on Mike Davis, or are you staying away from him this week?
No, I mean, I don't know how you can keep avoiding this, obviously. I mean, and in this spot too. I mean, I probably should have just given in last week. I mean, I kind of knew what was going to happen here. It's just so hard to get your mind around a guy like Mike Davis all of a sudden being thrust into this every down, like, huge role. But there's really no reason. I mean, look, for him to bust, he'd have to get maybe just limit himself to like 5 targets and maybe only catch 3 of those, and maybe only get like 15 carries and stay out of the end zone. So we're talking like a bust game is going to be like 80 yards and like 3 catches. Like, that feels like his absolute min floor right now, which is pretty crazy to say. So, and against Atlanta, I mean, obviously we have like a very low, just a lower bust potential. I mean, there's all kinds of potential this game breaks out. I mean, I can't even really make a case for fading him this week, except just as a pure ownership thing, right? Just as if you're targeting other games and he just doesn't fit him in, or you just want to target the wide receivers there. That's really the only reason why you kind of fade Mike Davis, right? Just from a roster construction standpoint, you're not going to play all the chalk and things like that. So cash games, I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't start with him, quite frankly, and all that. There's honestly just not much to say at this point. It's just happening. We all have to accept it. I mainly have to accept it. But Mike Davis is a thing until Christian McCaffrey gets back. And like I said, his floor looks as solid as it gets. So
he's not expensive enough. I mean, that's what the issue is especially, exactly. And he's more of a DraftKings play than a FanDuel play, because it's not like he's especially good or efficient. It's just they throw him the ball 10 times a game. And when you're getting a point per reception, just the floor is so high there. And then the ceiling also, because he's getting red zone work. So it's hard to avoid Mike Davis on DraftKings. I think there's more of a case that you don't have to roster him on FanDuel, but I agree. You need some Mike Davis exposure this week. I would certainly play him in cash games as well. With that said, there are some interesting pivots off of Mike Davis, because there's a whole lot of running backs I think are in good spots, priced in that 6K range. We've got Josh Jacobs at 6,300, CEH 6,800, Kareem Hunt's at 6,500. Really tough matchup for him against the Colts, but I mean, he figures to play a massive role now that Nick Chubb is out. Of some of these other guys in the 6,000 range, which of them do you think makes for the best pivot off of Mike Davis?
I like the fact that we're seeing Josh Jacobs go down a little bit. He was projecting to be a little bit chalky, but I think everyone's kind of like me, getting on I got to get a piece of Mike Davis train. And now we're seeing Josh Jacobs ownership seep down, which is great to see, quite frankly, because I didn't want to have to play like Mike Davis and 30% own Josh Jacobs as well. So Josh Jacobs ran for like 7 yards per carry against KC last year. KC, for all they do well on defense, and they've been really good on defense. They still don't stop the run well at all. Las Vegas's path to winning this game is rush Josh Jacobs 30 times, like just down their throat, get him into the end zone a few times. And Jacobs says, his PPR totals has picked up a bit. You're not going to get the same kind of, obviously, production in that area from Mike Davis, but I think you've got a way better chance of hitting the rush bonus, a way better chance. Well, I shouldn't say way better chance of getting in the end zone, but I think you've got a better chance of him seeing the end zone a couple times. I definitely like Josh Jacobs in this matchup. Again, this is just the way you attack KC. I think that people are a little bit off him too, because he's had some really tough matchups. He's gone to get up against the Colts, the Patriots, and they've kept him out of the end zone since that 3 touchdown game. So people are a little bit down on him. That's where I would go. That's my first inclination. But you mentioned Hunt, CEH. Both those guys are in play. But if you're asking me to who I like the best out of those three, it's going to be Josh Jacobs.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the pricing here, it's a pretty good win for the running backs don't matter crew, because we've got Mike Davis, who basically went undrafted in fantasy leagues this year at 6,400. Josh Jacobs, a first-round pick this year at 6,300. And then you go all the way down, we've got another first-round pick this year, Miles Sanders at 6,500. If I'm going to take a shot on somebody with no ownership this week, to me, it's Miles Sanders at 6,500. It's a tough matchup going up against the Steelers. But still, he's going to be so involved in the Eagles' offense going forward. He also started the year a little bit banged up, so I do think that his workload should increase a little bit going forward. And then still, I mean, it's just with the involvement in the pass game, the run game, I think that he's kind of game script safe. Like, I think whether the Eagles are ahead, whether they're behind, he's going to be on the field. I would be pretty surprised if we see him any lower than, or any less expensive than 6,500 going forward. Do you like Miles Sanders, and is there any other really just running back that stands out to you that's getting no ownership this week?
I don't mind the Miles Sanders play. I mean, I definitely understand it. And again, like a lot of these 6,500 plays, obviously projecting for well over 10%. So you're getting Sanders at the ownership you want him at, right? Like, which is like half these guys. I mean, is Miles Sanders going to outscore, or is Kareem Hunt going to outscore Miles Sanders like 3 times out of 4? I mean, probably not. He's probably going to do it, closer to like 60% or something. But definitely, like the PPR totals could go through the roof here. I mean, Pittsburgh's got a great pass rush. Carson Wentz doesn't have anyone to throw to downfield anyways. So it's more of a game script thing you're playing, obviously, but it absolutely could work out because Sanders would be on the field. So I don't mind that at all. Definitely just for the ownership, obviously an ownership play. I'm still seeing I'm massive on Jared McKinnon this week. I mean, if he gets that backfield to himself, he's going to be a big play. It's a really interesting situation. Right now, he's projecting for around 4% ownership on Awesemo. And the thing is, Raheem Mostert is still questionable. So I'm not sure how much that's going to go up. Like, I don't think people are just going to be okay with not having Raheem Mostert news and just putting Jerick McKinnon in the flex and be like, okay, I'll just, go for it. Like, they're just not going to do that. So I look at this as an opportunity. I will take a shot. And even if Raheem Mostert plays, I'll live and die with it, because I think McKinnon is the type of player where even if he gets 12 touches, could still get you like 25 points. So he does have that kind of explosiveness, and it's the exact kind of matchup you want against Miami. Maybe the worst rush defense in the league, definitely like a bottom 5. So that's the other dude like I really want a piece of. And again, almost hoping that we don't get Raheem Mostert news till kickoff, because I think that ownership will stay really low if it doesn't. And then, yeah, there's not. I mean, I think the one other play in that range, in that 6K range, that kind of stuck out to me, and I just want to see is James Robinson. He's projecting for a little bit lower ownership than some of these other guys we've seen. And again, I think if you're doing a fuller Deshaun Watson kind of stack, or you're going to stack the Texans, I kind of like coming back with James Robinson. We've seen, like, he's going to be involved in the passing game too. And, the Texans do not have a good rush defense. They've actually been okay. Like, their corners are playing pretty good against the pass. So I think that if you're going to use like Deshaun Watson, thinking about coming back with James Robinson as a bit of a low on play is viable as well. Because I think that's kind of the Jacksonville Jaguar I would be targeting if you're going to stack that game.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. James Robinson's been great this year. Also involved in the pass game, involvement in the run game. So I think that he's a guy who, even if the Texans get off to a pretty big lead, I think we could see James Robinson catch some balls because they're not using Chris Thompson nearly as much as I thought they were going to coming into the year. Exactly. It is pretty funny to go back and think about some of the guys that we liked or just anybody liked in week one, where I was like, hey, this could be a big year for Chris Thompson. The Jaguars are going to suck. They're going to be in a lot of situations where they have to throw the ball. And instead, it's like, no, Chris Thompson is just never going to touch the field, so it doesn't matter.
Top 15 ownership guys right now. We got Myles Gaskin, James Robinson, and Mike Davis leading the pack. Like, oh yeah, we could have totally predicted that, Greg. I mean.
Yeah, guys who didn't even have a gig heading into week one.
Oh man, good old.
All right, so let's move over to the wide receivers. Once again, DJ Moore picking up a ton of ownership, and once again, I just don't understand it. It's not to say this isn't a bad spot for DJ Moore. He's not a viable play, but just every week he comes out projected as one of the higher owned wide receivers on the slates, and he just doesn't really do that much. He's fine. He's involved. And I think there is some upside there. It's definitely a matchup he could do well in against the Falcons, but still, I just don't think it warrants 25% ownership. Actually, interesting enough, Robbie Anderson's the second highest owned wide receiver this week, and Anderson's been the much better fantasy option between the two of them. I've preferred Anderson to Moore for a lot of the season. I don't think you can't play more, but there's no way I want to go anywhere near what his ownership is when I'm making multiple lineups. So why is it that DJ Moore keeps picking up all this ownership?
Yeah, people just do not want to quit him. Like they literally do not want this guy to fail. So I do think it is just a little bit of, people just trying to, they've seen black come up like 4 times now on the roulette table and they're just expecting red. I mean, I think a lot of it is just that mentality. Look, we know DJ Moore is a pretty solid wide receiver, right? But at the same time, like he hasn't really proven that the Carolina offense is going to flow through him, and he's still 6K. I went back and watched every single basically wide receiver snap of that Carolina game because I wasn't really sold on Robbie Anderson before last week. I admit, like they are moving Robbie Anderson around everywhere. It's not just like this is Robbie Anderson running downfield and like, oh, it's just a lucky thing. They're using him on screens. He's motioned all the time. Like this is when Robbie Anderson is on the field, the ball is basically going to Robbie Anderson. So you really like that. And I think you really, really like that in this game against Atlanta. Now look, obviously I don't know what the coaches are going to do this week. Maybe they do that with DJ Moore, but the role I saw is DJ Moore is basically just playing on the outside. He's going downfield, and if he's open, he'll go there. But like the plays aren't being necessarily designed to get like DJ Moore open. They're designing to get Robbie Anderson open. So that's what I've seen. And then you also throw Curtis Samuel into that mix. It just takes away more chance that DJ Moore is going to get like 12 targets. So I don't understand it at all. I get the game situation. I get he's a good player, but it's just not warranted. It's absolutely not warranted. So that's about all I have on the Carolina game. I'll have Robbie Anderson exposure. I probably won't have any DJ Moore exposure.
Yeah, that's another weird situation where we have not only is there all this Cowboys chalk, which is a little bit more sensible to me. We've got Teddy Bridgewater is one of the 5 highest owned QBs this week. We've got Mike Davis is the highest owned running back. And then DJ Moore is the number 1 wide receiver and Robbie Anderson, number 2 wide receiver in projected ownership. It's not that it's a bad situation, and the Falcons always play up pace. There's a ton of points scored in their games. The best situation possible is the Falcons are up big in the fourth quarter because that's when we know that the Panthers probably going to light up their defense. But still, like really, people are just going to make lineups with 4 Panthers players in them. It just seems so crazy to me.
It's a hard thing that they'll to get it to work. So you obviously got to think about that. You want exposure to these games, and like we're obviously not trying to talk you off getting exposure to the Carolina Atlanta game, but yeah, you got to think about it. I mean, do you want to rely on 4 Carolina players, to get you like, over 25 points each or something? This is a team like Teddy Bridgewater isn't throwing a ton downfield. They're getting, like I said, they're getting Anderson open on a bunch of different routes and stuff like that. And you like the PPR work, but the downfield passes haven't really been there. I think Anderson's longest play was basically just a broken play. So something to think about. Again, I want exposure to it, but it's going to be like, it's going to be more muted than just stacking like the top 4 plays from that everyone likes. So for sure.
All right, so let's talk about this Falcons wide receiver situation. Total mess for anybody who played Showdown the other day because the Falcons, obviously they had Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley were both questionable to play that game. And so right before the game started, Julio ends up playing and was kind of decent in the first half. I think it was 4 catches for 41 yards or something like that. Doesn't come out for the second half. So then you figure, must be a big second half for Calvin Ridley. No, Calvin Ridley, who was in the mix with DeAndre Hopkins as the leading receiver coming into the week, catches 0 passes the entire game. So what are we doing with the Falcons here? Julio Jones is questionable to play. I assume he sits. Even if he plays, it is so hard for me to trust him right now. He is projecting for almost no ownership. But more interested I am in is Calvin Ridley. I think that it's a good spot to go back to him. How do you feel about these Falcons wideouts?
Yeah, I love Calvin Ridley this week. I'm on board. And I think this is the way you kind of attack this game. I think Calvin Ridley is the play personally. I'm gonna I'll stake my claim on that I think that the highest scorer from this game will be Calvin Ridley. I think it's a great matchup. They don't have a shutdown corner. I mean, look, Jari Alexander out there on Green Bay. Green Bay's a good team. Like they're a solid team with a solid defense. I know they've allowed a lot of yards, but they do have a shutdown corner. Like Atlanta for without Julio Jones, it just going up against a solid team that Atlanta's just not. They're not proficient enough. But they obviously the matchup is entirely different. I mean, we're talking about a Carolina defense with not good players on it, obviously, and then just ranking low and pretty much across the board. And there's no corners here that scare me off of Calvin Ridley. There's no pass rush here. I think that might be the biggest thing too, Greg, right? Like Matt Ryan's going to be able to sit back there. I mean, you look at adjusted sack rate and things, Carolina's like last, bottom 2, bottom 3. So I really like Calvin Ridley in this spot. I think he gets off the mat here. He's had a good week of practice from everything I've read. Maybe there was a little bit of injury stuff going on last week. It doesn't seem like that's going to be a big factor this week, though. At least, the very least, we get a week of kind of good practice and rest. So he's going to be looks like projecting for 14% ownership, nowhere near the chalk. I like attacking Calvin Ridley, and then you can add the Carolina plays on the other side. Maybe just throw him in with Mike Davis, maybe throw him in with Robbie Anderson, but that's where I like paying up for in that game. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to have him.
So some of the other chalk, we've talked about the Cowboys offense. Amari Cooper coming in really popular. I think that all 3 of the Cowboys receivers, you could make a case for playing them between Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb. Of the 3, I think Lamb makes for the strongest play. He looks by far like the best wide receiver out of this draft class. He's been terrific for the Cowboys, a lot of upside too. Michael Gallup always gets a little bit more, or at least comparable ownership to CeeDee Lamb. I don't get it. Michael Gallup has had over 5 targets in just 1 game so far this year. To me, I think Lamb is pretty clearly the second wide receiver on the Cowboys. And there's never that much of a price difference between the two. Actually, Gallup's been more expensive than Lamb a lot of the season. Lamb is $600 more expensive than him this week. I still think the price gap should be bigger. Gallup always has that home run type play upside where at any point we could see, that 80-yard touchdown from Michael Gallup. But outside of that, he generally doesn't have really big games. The ownership's already there on Cooper. 7,400, 19% owned amongst the most expensive receivers. He's going to be the highest owned. I think that Lamb is the guy that I want to stake my claim in of this trio and the guy that I'm looking to in game stacks. How do you feel about the Cowboys wideouts?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you. I mean, look, Michael Gallup could happen in this game. He's getting the targets he's getting are downfield. So you could end up with a situation where, Dak likes the matchup and it's not a bad matchup. I mean, I think James Bradbury's played very well, but he's more likely to set up against Amari Cooper, which I actually think drags Cooper down a little bit. Bradbury's played well. But Lamb in the slot, Darnay Holmes, you just look at how these guys have played, whatever. I mean, this is a good matchup for CeeDee Lamb. So, Gallup is more of like you're just going to kind of, if you're going to make some Cowboys stacks, you're going to want some exposure to Michael Gallup. He's cheap enough too that, and he's going to be lower owned. She's not even going to be that lower owned, but I still feel like if you're making a bunch of Cowboys stacks, you're going to want some exposure to him. He wouldn't be my highest exposed wide receiver. I would agree. I think for me, that would be Lamb as well. But the way they're using it right now is, I mean, obviously, Lamb is more just the kind of, pseudo tight end, whereas Gallup is just getting a few downfield targets. And if they work out great, and it's a big play, but if they don't, you're just left with nothing. And he's not getting the same kind of treatment as far as volume. So CeeDee Lamb is the play here for me. I agree. Cooper would be, it's a bold fade, but I'm actually okay with fading Amari Cooper this week. I just talked about Ridley at that same price. I would much rather go to Ridley.
All right, so moving down the ownership ranks, one guy who I think is getting overlooked, which makes sense because the quarterback's getting overlooked too, and that's DeAndre Hopkins. This is a really good matchup against the Jets, And if we look at how the Cardinals have utilized Hopkins this year, he's getting 1 billion targets. Like, they're throwing to Hopkins as often as they can. I know last week he didn't have a huge fantasy game, but at least on DraftKings, it was still salvageable because he caught a ton of passes. He only went for 41 yards, except he had enough PPR points that it was an okay game. I think that if we look at him, I understand he's a little expensive at 7,900, but it's not like we have that many guys to spend up for this week. I think that on the high end, Hopkins is a really good pivot off of Amari Cooper. I like that stack with Kyler Murray. How do you feel about Hopkins, and are you willing to pay up for him?
Yeah, it's again, we just don't. There's no one over 8K to pay up for, so this isn't hard to fit in. It really isn't, and we have some decent. Some decent min-price guys we could even think about, and things like that. So if you're, I mean, look, the more, I knew I already kind of liked it, but just the more we talk about it here, obviously, and going through these other games, I mean, the Kyler DeAndre Hopkins stack has to make some sense. I mean, the Cardinals have like a 30-point team total. Like, somebody is going to have a big day on that team for them. I mean, what are they going to do? Score 3 defensive touchdowns? I know it's Joe Flacco, so maybe that is in the mix, but like probably still not going to happen, right? Maybe it is Kenyon Drake time. I don't know. I'm not even going to like go there with as far as analysis, because it's just there's nothing. He's just playing terrible, right? So, the rational thought here is Kyler DeAndre probably going to have a massive day. This is not a good secondary. You saw Tim Patrick and Brett Rippon go for big plays against them last week. Like, what is DeAndre Hopkins going to do against this team? I mean, you could easily see a couple touchdown days. So, yeah, I love it. I wrote him up on, the Awesemo. You can go from the slot article. It's free out there. It shows you a little bit of the Awesemo grading at each position. You can go check that out. It's free on the site. But he was my target for wide receivers. I mean, he grades out really well. The ownership is way, way lower than we've seen on him at any week in the season. There's really nothing not to like here, except maybe like you just think that, Arizona gets up and just tries to grind it away. But I don't think that after 2 losses, Arizona is in a spot where they can just get up and be like, okay, let's just give the ball to Kenyon Drake and let him go run for 2 yards a carry and we'll be good. Like, they got to put their foot to the pedal here if they get up. I mean, this is like, they can't afford to lose 3 in a row. So love the spot for DeAndre. Like I said, guys, definitely check out the site and hit that like button for us too. We appreciate it, guys.
If this is finally the Kenyon Drake week, the internet is going to go nuts because everybody played Kenyon Drake for so long. He's been terrible in great matchups. Everybody's off Kenyon Drake. Now, I'm off Kenyon Drake this week. I want nothing to do with Kenyon Drake.
You're talking to a guy who's got him in like all his season-long leagues too, like an idiot. So, I'm like stuck with Kenyon Drake. I'm just like, we're living together until like something happens here. So like, it's like a bad relationship, right? Like, no one's willing to leave the apartment or whatever. Like, we're just stuck together. So
I think we're not that far from Chase Edmonds time, but we'll see. Not somebody I'm willing to roster quite yet, except I think we could be heading there in the near future. One more wide receiver I wanna talk on, because this is somebody who absolutely crushed me last week. Last week was my best slate of the year so far for football, but I had a handful of lineups that scored over 200 points on DraftKings that got a goose egg out of Brandon Cooks. Now, there was a couple issues with Brandon Cooks. Number one, like we talked about before, Deshaun Watson has not played particularly well this year. As a whole, the Texans' offense has been terrible. The other thing also is Brandon Cooks just didn't get a lot of targets last week. It seemed like it was going to be a really good spot for him. It just didn't really come to fruition. The one thing that I think we could see now that there's a coaching change in Houston is we could see different wide receivers get prioritized. I still think Cooks is a high upside guy. I think there's a chance for him to go off. At 4,100, I like his upside. I'm not going to be quite as bullish on him this week as I was last week. I'm still going to mix him in, though. 4,100 is really cheap for wide receiver with the kind of upside that Cooks has. Is it crazy to go back to him after what he did last week?
I don't think so. I mean, if we'd like Deshaun Watson to go off here, I mean, like, he's the most like sort of other dude other than Will Fuller that we can kind of target. I mean, Akins is banged up. Randall Cobb is just, catching 5-yard passes over the middle and then sort of falling forward. So that's not going to get us anywhere. Brandon Cooks has looked fine to me when he's been on the field. It's just like this offense is so just out of sync. I mean, Deshaun Watson's out of sync. The O-line is out of sync. It just does not look good. So, but if you're playing them this week, you're obviously playing that the coaching change is going to change some of this. So like you said, you might as well roster a little bit of Brandon Cooks with Deshaun Watson and figure that the change does help him, because
he looks fine. I don't think it's a Brandon Cooks issue. And I know I actually read something on Deshaun Watson right before this. He basically just said, I was looking for Cooks. He just, the scheme, like he was never open. And I just ended up not going there. So I don't think it was anything to do with what Cooks was doing. I think that a lot of it was just the scheme that was being deployed and the opponent. But at some point, like they got to get this guy the ball. I mean, so I agree. I think that if he's 4,100, he's going to be nothing owned. At the very least, you throw him in with like a triple stack with Deshaun Watson in some kind of manner. There's just too much potential there. I mean, you basically need like 2 long plays for this to pay off. So, and at the ownership levels you're getting, I don't mind it. I mean, it's not like a must have for me, but yeah, if you're big on Deshaun Watson, he's the other guy I would mix in 100%, other than the chalk.
Yeah, it's just he's so cheap versus what we've seen him priced at historically. In theory, this should be a much better situation for him with the Texans than he had last year as kind of the third wide receiver with the Rams. So, yeah, I think we do see him get off eventually, unless he's just totally washed, which, maybe that's the case also. And I'll find out 2 weeks.
He doesn't look washed, though. Like when he gets the ball in space.
And he's healthy.
Yeah, he looks fine. So I really think it's coaching. I think that they're just that offense again. To me, it just looks so strange the way it's operating this year that I really feel like just like a shift in philosophy is going to do a lot there. Obviously, we're kind of it's a little bit of narrative. It's a little bit of relying on the coaches to do something positive, but it just can't be any worse. So again, at the very least, it's going to give you a more unique using Brandon Cook in Texan stacks. It's going to make your stack more unique for Millie makers and stuff like that. That's what you want. So.
All right. Any other cheap wide receivers you want to mention before we move on?
I give a little bit of a shout out to Jeff Smith. It looks like the min price play. He's going to be like 1% owned as well. I just really like him. He looked really good last week. Again, just another guy I kind of went back and watched every catch. Out there coming back to the ball. He's got sub 4.4 speed. He just looked really good. And again, I know I kind of hate the fact that he's playing with Joe Flacco because he looked good with Darnold. So we don't know how that's going to work out. But I mean, if you like stacking, the Arizona game, then, coming back to Jeff Smith isn't the worst idea. Perriman and Sims aren't playing. It's, Chris Hogan is completely washed. So you basically have Crowder over the middle and then Jeff Smith. I mean, if they just, sort of go pounce down on Crowder, which I think, it makes sense from a defensive standpoint, Jeff Smith could be out there. So I think him and Herndon could be like good cheap targets from that Jets offense. Obviously, these aren't cash game or anything like that, but, just shout out if you're looking for min price punts at like 1%. I like that play.
Yeah, I would have loved Jeff Smith if it was Sam Darnold as the quarterback again. I'll get some exposure to him just because of the price and that, he did start, he played a ton of snaps. He got targets last week. So, that's all encouraging. It's hard for me to trust Joe Flacco.
It really does suck. Yeah. Because I would have liked it a lot better with Darnold, but again, he's going to be out there. Maybe we don't need Joe Flacco to be world beater. We just need him to target Jeff Smith like 7 times. So.
Yeah, and I will say this, at least for all the Joe Flacco, is he elite, is he not elite jokes and Joe Flacco kind of generally sucking. Here's the thing also, as far as backup quarterbacks go, you could do worse than Joe Flacco. There's worse guys you could throw in there like Kyle Allen. So it's not like Joe Flacco is a total zero. Exactly. I think as a backup quarterback, he is serviceable.
Yeah. Again, we're bringing up Jets players because we obviously have a little bit of respect for Joe Flacco and his ability to at least get the ball downfield. So agree 100%.
All right. So if you guys want to get access to some of the stuff like the projections and ownership that we're talking about, you can get access to all the great Awesemo Plus tools and content from nearly every DFS sport out there with an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95. This includes access to all premium content tools on Awesemo.com, including player projections, ownership projections, our premium Slack channel, and much more. And if you're only looking to play NFL, then sign up for our weekly NFL package, which is only $14.95. Or our NFL Weekly Express Pass, which is new. That's only for $3.95. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. So moving on to the tight end position now. And this has been such a ridiculously tough position to fill this year. There has been so little production at tight end. However, a little reprieve this week because we've got George Kittle back now finally healthy. Travis Kelce finally playing on a Sunday. The Chiefs never seem to have Sunday games, so that's an option. So we kind of have 3 chalk options that are actually viable between Darren Waller, George Kittle, Travis Kelce. If you're only picking one of these guys, which are you going to?
It's a tough question. Probably going to go with Waller, just the outright chalk. I know that's obviously just taking the guy who's lowest price between the three, but I just can't see Vegas being in the spot here where they don't just get the ball to Darren Waller as much as possible. I mean, I know I like Josh Jacobs as well, but I have these three guys graded very, very similarly, but I do feel like Waller and Jacobs when the chips are down and stuff for Vegas, those are the guys they're going to go to, and with them both healthy, that's who I have. That's just who I have rated on top. So I have Kelsey rated like very, very similar. Definitely don't mind going to him either. But you're asking me to rank them. I would go Waller, Kelsey, Kittle.
Yeah, so I mean, I think all three of them are viable. So we are kind of splitting hairs. I kind of put Geoff on the spot there by making him pick one. But it's actually going to be Kittle for me. He is the guy who was the top overall fantasy tight end last year. The other per game basis. The other thing too is I think it's going to matter with Jimmy Garoppolo coming back. They've got a plus matchup. I hear what you say about Jerick McKinnon, especially if Mostert's out. But I also wonder too, are they going to look to throw the ball a little bit more this week with all the running backs banged up? And I think that's a possibility. And then getting George Kittle, obviously having Garoppolo to throw to him, that makes a big difference. Nick Mullins actually targeted him a decent amount last week. As terrible as Mullins played, the one guy who did benefit was George Kittle. But still, I think that Kittle should be able to have a really big game now that we have Garoppolo back, and also plus matchup against the Dolphins. Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, also both fine plays. I think you want to have one of these three in your cash lineup. And as far as GPPs go, if you're playing multiple lineups, you want exposure to all of them. I think that all of them have comparable upside, and all of them have really high floors also, which is a really nice reprieve from just the terrible options we've had at tight end in previous weeks.
We don't talk about cash game construction too much on this show, obviously, but who would you take for a cash game there?
I'd still go Kittle. I'd probably go Kittle or Waller. I'd actually fill the tight end position in last. I think how I do it is I build the rest of them of my lineup with the players I like, and then if I really need to save the money, I'd go to Waller. If I could pay up for George Kittle, I would do it. Kelsey's the one guy that I'd be less inclined to play in cash. I'm definitely gonna get GPP exposure to all three.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm the same. I'm not saying I necessarily pay up for one in a cash game lineup this week. I think I would actually go with Kelsey for a cash game, but that's a bigger discussion. Anyways, I was just interesting. I think the real question is, like, are you getting Evan Ingram exposure? Are you going to eat this Evan Ingram chalk?
Yeah, actually, so the first lineup I made, just kind of as a dummy lineup, which I always hand build one lineup as the pricing first comes out.
Sure.
And I said before that with all the chalk going towards Dak Prescott, and I was trying to get exposure to the other side of the game. The first lineup I built was a Daniel Jones stack with Evan Ingram.
Right.
And I felt that was a good way to get exposure to that game and upside for a really cheap price. Ingram is getting a decent amount of ownership, but I think there's a lot of upside in making like a Daniel Jones, Evan Ingram, and Darius Slayton stack, and then running back with Ezekiel Elliott. So you're playing for the game script where it's like, hey, the Cowboys get up by 20 points. The Giants are throwing to try to come from behind late. And the pricing is all good there. So if I'm saving money with one tight end, it is going to be Evan Ingram for me.
Yeah, and the thing is, I kind of said it smirkingly. Obviously, he's not going to be that chalky because we do have three elite tight ends up there, and people are going to pay up for it. So, I love Evan Ingram as a player. I've watched every Giants game obviously so far, and like they're terrible. Like they're not doing anything. They're not getting the ball downfield like you want to see him. Use his 4.4 speed, but he's destroyed the Cowboys over his career. I mean, he like every single game he's had like at least 7 catches or something to that effect. Anyways, like he's absolutely dominated this team. So I do kind of like it. I admit, like I don't really want to trust anything New York, but like realistically, you look at the ownership percentages too. Like Daniel Jones isn't going to be crazy. So own Jones, Ingram. And even if you threw Slayton in, it's not going to be like the chalkiest chalk of the chalk this week. It's going to be up there in ownership, but you're going to get a little bit of uniqueness there. So I really can't say that it's a play I hate. I hate trusting the Giants, obviously, but like 4,600 for Evan Ingram in a really good spot. I'm pretty much going to be on that side most of the time, even with how terrible the Giants have played. So I don't mind it. I think there are some really interesting GPP plays at tight end though this week. The guy I'm sort of most interested in is Tyler Higby, going up against Washington. I targeted Mark Andrews last week. Obviously, he didn't get like a ton of targets. We needed those touchdowns, but that is what Washington does. Like they just don't cover the tight end well in any situation. And the Ravens and the Rams are very similar in a lot of ways. They'll use their tight end in the passing game in situations like that. They'll go to 12 personnel. I think Higby could be in for a very similar game that Mark Andrews had last week, where maybe he only catches 4 or 5 passes, but those passes, much like we saw when he caught 3 touchdowns against another weak team, Philly, they just turn into touchdowns. They just turn into gold. So I don't mind eating like a 1% Tyler Higby here. I think that could pay off.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting just because of the price ranges in. At 5,600, nobody's going to play him. I mean, we have him projected for, basically 0 ownership right now, which is because with all the ownership going to Waller, Kittle, Kelsey, and he's not quite in that price tier, but he's just below it. So he's going to go totally overlooked. And yeah, I think you could go to him as a contrarian play. One guy I haven't been on this year, and he's had some big games, is Dalton Schultz for the Cowboys. Yeah. He's just not really getting a ton of targets. He just happens to make 1 or 2 big plays per game, and it just seems like all of a sudden he's there at the end of the game. I don't like Dalton Schultz that much as a play, but I could see people looking at the game logs and just chasing points with him. Have you been on Dalton Schultz at all this year? And is this going to be the time you jump on him?
No, this definitely won't be the time I jump on him. I mean, it's a little bit of Mike Davis syndrome. Like my brain just can't handle the fact that Dalton Schultz. It's also, I just feel very, very attacked whenever Dalton Schultz catches a pass because I had so much Blake Jarwin, and it just pisses me off to no end. So I think my brain is just like pretends he doesn't exist. But yeah, I think, we talked about the game script a little bit. Obviously, we're both kind of on the angle that maybe the Cowboys don't have to throw 50 times in this game. Because it's the Giants. So I think that the guy you cross off your list first has to be Dalton Schultz. I mean, he's benefited from prevent defenses, Dak having to get the ball out quick. It's just, the firing it over the middle, Dalton Schultz. I just don't know if they're going to necessarily have to do that 8 times in this game. He might still get 4 or 5 targets. He probably will, but 4,800, the price isn't a bargain anymore. I'd probably rather take a shot with Logan Thomas, with Kyle Allen in a quarterback. I think that could actually bump him up, his efficiency up. I'd probably rather take a shot with Chris Herndon, with Joe Flacco in. I actually think that could help Herndon get going. I think one thing that Flacco has done consistently over his career actually is use tight ends. So I think Herndon is actually really in play for me as the cheap option. And then just for fun, I'll throw a 1 min price play. I don't know if you got anyone that's interested you at like 2,500 on DK, but no, yeah, fair enough. I mean, look, from an interest point, I say, you're making unique GPP lineups. You just want to pump one position. Richard Rodgers, man, he's basically taken over the Dallas Goedert role in Philly. Should be playing like, at least 40% of the snaps. He's getting a few targets. Who else is Carson Wentz going to throw to? So, I mean, it's kind of that situation. You're obviously just hoping he gets, 3 or 4 targets and maybe falls in the end zone. But 2,500, that's the only sort of viable guy I could really find out there this week.
All right, we're coming close to the conclusion here. We get to defense, my least favorite position in fantasy, because I always just kind of feel like it's a crapshoot, but it's there, so it's always something we have to mention. On the high end, the Rams aren't really picking up any ownership going up against Washington, which I think is pretty interesting with Kyle Allen taking over a quarterback. I don't usually like to pay up at defense, but I actually did last week, and I'm probably going to again this week because I don't really see any obvious cheap defense. I think the Rams are a good one to go to going up against Kyle Allen. The Washington offense has been terrible so far this year. I don't think it's going to change with Allen at quarterback. Which defense stands out the most to you?
If I'm paying up, I'm going to go to Pittsburgh. I still think that the Philly O-line is a real issue. They got through it last week. I think that was a little bit of the 49ers fatigue with injuries and stuff, but Steelers are a different beast. They're full. They're ready to go. They're off a bye. They're fully healthy. I think Carson Wentz could get murdered in this game. Like honestly, I mean, I really like the Steelers. You got a really safe floor there. They still haven't gotten any defensive touchdowns. They're averaging like over 9 DK fantasy points per game. So I actually really like paying up for them. This is a week too where you can get up to them. I mean, again, we've said it like 4 times in the show. There's just there's no one you necessarily have to pay up for. There's guys in low spots that are really interesting and you can pay up for, but you can get the Steelers in this week for sure. So I really like the Steelers. I think I'm kind of sold on the Browns being like the sub 2,800 play that I'm going to go to. Phillip Rivers, targeting him, never a bad thing. Like I said, I do like the way the Browns are playing, giving them a little bit more credit. The Colts have a good defense too, so you could absolutely go to the other side if you just think I'm obviously full of malarkey or whatever. But yeah, I don't mind the Browns for the cheap D. I'm probably going to skip the Texans chalk. I don't know. Is there anyone you really like punting with? Because the Dolphins maybe. I can't do it. I can't do Dolphins.
I don't mind the Jaguars at 2,900. I mean, if the Texans are going to be chalky, and the Texans offensive line has been awful this year, so I think going after the Jaguars a little bit makes some sense there. Yeah, I mean, especially if Watson's going to be picking up a lot of ownership, that's something I think makes sense as a contrarian play. But I never really have all that much conviction in a defense. So let's wrap up here, Geoff. And by the way, also a little tie in here. Not only are we going to hit our favorite stack of the week, but if you go to awesemo.com, the free content of the day is the NFL Premium Stack Tool. So with that in mind, who is your stack of the week?
Oh, I'm like very undecided at this point in the week for where I usually am at. Maybe that's a good thing, because when I get too high on something, I just get very straight focused and I can't change my mind. I'm going to say this Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins stack goes for like 60 points. So I'm going to say that's where we should go is Arizona. This is the Arizona stack.
Well, I got news for you. That's the exact same one I've written down. So
okay, well, let's go. What's your second favorite one?
I'll go with Daniel Jones, Devin Ingram, because that's the first one I built this week. But yeah, I think as a contrarian stack, I view the Kyler Murray to DeAndre Hopkins very similar to how I viewed Lamar Jackson to Mark Andrews last week, where it's one, maybe the pricing isn't perfect, except it's just too low owned for what the upside of those players are. So that's how I feel about the Kyler Murray to DeAndre Hopkins this week. It's 2 weeks ago, that was the most highest owned play on the slate. Now all of a sudden everybody's off them. So I do think it makes sense to go back to them. And with that, we're done for the week. Guys, we still have the NASCAR show coming up. There's going to be MMA Live Before Lock later, so check those out also. Before you leave the door, make sure to give Geoff and I the thumbs up. That helps us with the algorithm and however YouTube works its magic. So we'll be back next week.